Richard Dalton is a former UK ambassador to Iran and former consul general in Jerusalem. You're joining us from North Yorkshire in the UK. You probably heard we were speaking to a former top Israeli diplomat. Now we're speaking to you, former top UK diplomat. Having held that position in multiple countries across the Middle East, how does someone with your experience, your behind-the-scenes knowledge, analyze where we are right now?
First, I'd like to endorse the points made by the previous Israeli speaker about the requirement for Israel to use diplomacy and to accept that the massive support they have received since October the 7th last year denies and completely contradicts this perception that somehow they're on their own and that nobody will support them. In fact, my view is that the degree of support from the outside world, including from the UK, is actually working against early progress towards de-escalation. It's working against establishing a peaceful settlement across the region, whether within Palestine or beyond, because it is creating this sense that Israel can do what it wants. They can humiliate the United States. They can bank the military support from the United Kingdom and Israel's European partners and not to do anything to respond to the requirements of those countries that there should be progress towards Palestinian statehood as a prerequisite for peace. Peace goes through Gaza. Peace goes through recognizing that international legitimacy applies to Israel as well as to others. We are in a situation now where Israel is trying to establish deterrence, regional dominance. We don't know how far they will go. Secondly, we're in a situation where Iran had to respond to the killing of the negotiator, Ismail Haniyeh, on Iranian soil, and it has chosen to do so in a predictable way, which constitutes a warning to Israel that having fired off only a tiny proportion of its missile arsenal, Iran is still in a position to create an overwhelming effect on Israel's air defenses if the war should escalate. It is, of course, a very risky strategy by Iran because Israeli retaliation is likely to cause significant damage to Iran, and there is always a risk that the United States would come in on Israel's side.
Richard, could I jump in for a second? Because several things you mentioned raise this question for me. For somebody like you who's been behind the scenes, can you talk to us about the decision-making in moments of peak crisis like the one we're in now? Who calls the shots? Is it just a handful of leaders at the very end of the day, Benjamin Netanyahu, maybe Joe Biden, maybe the Iranian supreme leader, or is it a wider conversation involving back-channel discussions, diplomacy, and a larger group of people that are not known to the public?
It's a small group of people, namely the leaders you mentioned. I believe that opinion has turned against Israel because of Israel's action, because of Israel's denial of basic human rights, because Israel's denial that rights which it claims for itself should be accorded to others, chiefly the millions of Palestinian residents of the neighboring territory. I think that that belief amongst a very large number in Britain is not being reflected at the highest levels in our political life, who see much more short-term considerations of wishing to stay close to the Americans, and where the Americans have abrogated their duty to remain clear about re-establishing international order in the Middle East and have decided to come down and empower Israel, that naturally shifts European and British policy in the direction of the United States and in the direction of Israel.
So Iran says, and we just played before you a clip of the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian. He says, we want peace, we will go no further. Israel, leave things where they are now, and this will be the end of it. We'll draw a line under what happened. Israel says, as it has for many years. Well, they claim that Iran doesn't even recognize their right to exist, exercises malign influence, and now is the time to weaken Iran. With two very different visions of where we are right now, how does that get resolved?
Well, the start must be a ceasefire in Gaza, followed by an international regime which enables the creation of a stable political polity owned by the Palestinians, with which the international community can cooperate for the reconstruction of Gaza. We've already discussed the vital significance of serious progress, as Saudi Arabia is insisting, for example, towards a Palestinian state. But there's a further level, and that is that lessons must be learned by the international community as a whole on the disastrous results of both Hamas's action and the Israeli reaction. And that must concentrate on how to avoid future total destruction by countries waging war. The war on the civilian population in Gaza must be a lesson to us to try and reestablish a rule of international law. There needs to be an international conference so that the Grozny effect of Russian action in that territory, Chechnya, won't be repeated, and that the Israeli effect on Gaza and maybe now in Lebanon won't be repeated. And secondly, there needs to be regional de-escalation across the Persian Gulf. So the long-awaited, long-hoped-for regional security architecture, including Iran and not excluding them, as is the current intention of the United States and Israel, and only then will we be able to neutralize threats from Iran.
Richard Dalton, former UK ambassador to Iran and former consul general in Jerusalem, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.